everyone, my name is Evan and I like to make stop-motion dinosaurs and monsters, and now that our dragon restoration is done, it's time for some more movie monster fun. So Project Shin Godzilla has now begun. First thing we need to make for Shin, I say, is the base frame today, and as I craft away at Shin Godzilla's skeleton today, we'll be learning more about this Japanese movie monster's terrifying origins, I do say. So be sure to smash that like button as hard as a kaiju, as I like to say. Subscribe if you're new here today so you don't miss a video, I do say. Share with your monster-loving friends and comment below what you think at the end. So, my fellow nerds and Godzilla fans alike, the topic of the day is Shin Godzilla, you could say. Otherwise known as Shin Godzilla for those that don't speak Japanese. Quick fun fact to know and share, the word Gojira is a combination of Japanese words, both gorilla and whale. Anyways, I have an explanation video for you, and this one's detailing the character of Shin Godzilla. And it's been a while since I've done a movie monster specifically, so it's good to be back. Shin Godzilla, otherwise known as the God of Destruction, is one of the most interesting takes on this movie monster thus far, as he's one of the few we see that go through multiple evolutionary stages. The only other ones that immediately come to mind is Manila and potentially Godzilla -1. However, that being said, even their growth wasn't exactly that drastic. More on Godzilla -1 later on. The origins of Shin Godzilla are never explicitly stated in the film, but it's proposed that his origins lie as being some sort of Pacific Sea creature that was exposed to and thusly mutated by nuclear waste. Since the 1950s, not only did it develop an immunity to this radioactive wasteland, it started feeding on it as some sort of subsistence, and over the course of 60 years, grew and changed till it was able to have a form that could withstand being on land, then eventually evolving over time into something that can stand upright. The zoology professor in the film, Gore Maki, hypothesized that Godzilla's origins lie as a prehistoric marine reptile from the Paleozoic era. In his first form, he exists as seemingly a large, angry reddish tail shooting out of the water, and whiplashing to and fro as the rest of his body's actually laying underneath the surface. The second form, nicknamed Kamata-kun, is 122 meters long and 28 meters tall, and takes on the appearance of an eel shark with legs, for lack of a better description. It has giant fish eyes and tan dorsal plates. To be honest, it's only a face a mother could love. Potentially. And it should be mentioned that it has to lean forward rather awkwardly, as it runs about with its nearly vestigial arms. However, as time passes, it fixes its posture some, and begins to stand up into its third form, nicknamed Shinagawa-kun. The yellow-green color turns into a darkish reddish brown. The little arms grow just a teeny bit more as the giant eyes fit more into the face. And it should be noted he still looks a little awkward in this stage in his life. To be honest, a bit ugly. Shinagawa-kun stands at 57 meters tall and 168.25 meters long, before becoming the fourth form which we are most familiar with. The fourth form is known as Katakuma-san, and is the form that takes the most resemblance from past Godzillas, however is still very unique in its own right. It has rough black skin and black dorsal plates with red hues all along its body. This was a Godzilla that was meant to be feared. Standing in at 118.5 meters tall, 333 meters long, and weighs in at 92,000 metric tons. It is understandable how he was essentially untouchable for such a large portion of the film, which isn't even including his special capabilities or powers. Speaking of which, let's get into those. The abilities of Katakuma-san include the trademark atomic breath, but this time it takes on more of a purple glowish hue, and more focused laser-like look in its appearance. But not only does it cut down objects, it sets them ablaze like a plasma beam. And that's not all either, because Shin Godzilla can redirect those beams out his dorsal plates and tail as well. So whatever direction you stand in, you're bound to get hit. He is also extremely durable, as the only military weapon that did damage to him was the massive Orbitant Penetrator, or Mop Bomb, that struck off one of his dorsal plates and actually made him bleed. It should also be briefly mentioned during his evolutionary stages, Shin was basically bleeding all over the place, but at this point, he wasn't really bleeding anymore, apart from the damage that was actually delivered to him at this point, which we'll probably talk about in a future video. Either way, he did heal that wound over fairly quickly with his regeneration powers. This true god of destruction also comes equipped with a phase array radar, which essentially means he is able to detect threats without actually needing to see them. So there's no safe approach from any direction from those big plasma beams, not to mention you can't sneak up on this character. So at this point, you might be asking, what can bring this behemoth down? Well, there is a limit to how much atomic energy that this Godzilla can use. And after he's done expending all this excess nuclear energy, he has to go through a 15-day restoration period. And this was of course exploited in the movie, forcing a reactor scram inside his body, and during this process, essentially freezing him solid. Also, he has very tiny arms that have the resemblance of burnt chicken wings. Now, you might be thinking, that's all. However, there's still more secret forms. Although the fourth form is what's given the most attention in the film, the fifth form was very close to making a nightmarish debut, and may have actually been truly unstoppable. At the end of the movie, you can see small humanoid skeleton creatures with dorsal plates traveling and forming at the end of Godzilla's tail. These horrific fanged beasts with 2 eye holes, with long fingers and pale skin, was not only potentially capable of doing what the last form could do, but potentially even more. Luckily though, we don't see the final result of that in the film, which in retrospect is probably a good thing because there's only one outcome in that scenario. Basically burning down all of Japan and potentially taking over the entire world. Now, with that being said, what are your thoughts on the uncanny value of the existence of Shin Godzilla? Let me know in the comments below. Now that leads us into a theory, a film theory, a Shin Godzilla -1 theory. Now, a quick summary on Godzilla -1, essentially he's supposed to be the original one, where he shows 2 different evolutionary stages in the movie. One where he's more of an original dinosaur type monster, and then gets, well, morphed into Godzilla from the nuclear bombing and testing that was basically occurring. Here you can see a pattern developing already. Both Godzillas obviously use atomic energy to basically form into something else, with it either being atomic bombing and or consuming nuclear waste. I'm assuming consuming nuclear waste is not a very healthy option. With that being said, I assume actually neither option is very viable, considering this is probably why Godzilla is so angry. Now, one other common trait that Shin Godzilla shares with Godzilla -1 is that they both have regeneration powers, which means they're able to heal themselves almost instantly. So in my opinion, those are 2 very common traits that kind of stick out like sore thumbs. Which leads me into this theory, this film theory. Now, spoiler alert, at the end of Godzilla -1, yes, it is true they defeat the monster. However, there is a clip at the very ending suggesting that this monster isn't truly defeated just yet. Because just before the film ends, you can see one of the larger chunks of Godzilla that is still remaining happens to be, well, forming and morphing into something else. And considering the time frame in which Godzilla -1 is being taken place, which is 1945, that seems to oddly line up with another time frame. If you consider the earlier fact about Shin Godzilla essentially feeding off nuclear waste since the 1950s. So I have a sneaking suspicion or a theory that Godzilla -1 is essentially the first evolutionary stage of Shin Godzilla, just occurring 60 years later to seek vengeance on the human race, buying its time by regenerating and consuming nuclear waste to essentially help speed up that process. Which also happens to be very similar to what legendary Godzilla does as well when he seems to be running low on power. You can usually give him a bit of a boost, but that being said, I would imagine consuming nuclear waste is probably far more toxic and less healthy, giving you, well, less desirable side effects. Explaining why Shin Godzilla might not be the most healthiest of specimens at the beginning. So, to briefly sum my theory up, essentially I think that Godzilla -1 is technically Shin Godzilla, and was basically formed out of that remaining blob you see at the end of the Godzilla -1 movie. Now, I do understand that this does slightly contradict the zoologist theory in Shin Godzilla, but this could be a classic case of just misinformation, not exactly perhaps tying 2 together. Or perhaps certain files were buried during the first incident, therefore being unaware of what this potentially is. Because one should bear in mind that this is nearly 60 years later. So that's my film theory on Godzilla Minus One and Shin Godzilla. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I crazy or am I not? It seems to be that these two characters share an awful lot of things in common. I mean, that could be added up to the fact that they're both Godzillas technically. However, it seems a little suspicious in my end, especially that ending at Godzilla Minus One. I guess we won't truly know if I'm right or not up until the sequel. At any rate, it's time for the build rundown. So the materials used on this Godzilla project today was a lot of Sculpey oven-baked clay, brackets not sponsored. But a lot of that went to basically making those spikes, and I can't emphasize enough how much work went into those. It was at least probably 2-3 days of spike work, but that's pretty normal for a lot of my Godzillas. Now, for part 2, I do have a special painting technique that I'm going to try out with these spikes because I went a little bit more detail than usual. I also used a lot of tinfoil today to basically help save us on the weight because you don't want your Godzillas to fall over, so that's highly recommended to use tinfoil as a filler to help save weight and clay. Then we also used some armature wire for basically the joints and the tail, as well as some plasticine clay to help make the joints stay, which we're currently having a little bit of trouble with trying to show off this tail that was made off camera. So this tail tip is easily probably one of the more difficult / creepy things that I've ever made. Unfortunately, there is no footage of me making it because it was really difficult and I just didn't have a whole lot of time span left on this video for criming in theories and everything else. So that was one thing I kind of had to make off camera, unfortunately. But as you can see, it's essentially 2 human jaws, the outside one being very deformed and the inside one looking a little bit more familiar and actually functional. So I'm looking forward to doing some tail animations with this character. And I guess you can consider that this tail is just a little bit of a bonus for you people that stick towards the end of the videos. Now, probably one of the cooler things I was able to pull off on this skeleton, Shin Godzilla's lower split jaw. I'm happy to say I was actually able to pull that off. So one could say more surprises are coming your way, so stay tuned for part 2 and 3 soon coming your way. Hello everyone, my name is Evan and I like to make stop motion dinosaurs and monsters. And on the Shin Godzilla project today, we are on the second part, I say, where one could say we'll be painting away and adding the first layer of clay, I do say. First thing we need to work on today during this video, I say, is painting the skeleton, you could say. And then once that's done, it's on to the plasticine sculpting fun. And while I paint and sculpt away, we'll be talking about a deleted scene from Shin Godzilla today, I do say. Shin Godzilla is filled with unsettling and even horrific scenes that leaves a long-lasting impact on viewers after the film has ended. Whether or not that's pools of blood that rain from Godzilla's spine, or his blood vomit, or whether it's the haunting images of a city on fire, or if it's Shin Godzilla's googly eyes themselves, you have plenty to pick from. Shin Godzilla was the closest the series had come to being a full-blown horror film since the original, or arguably now -1. But did you know the directors, Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi, originally had something far more sinister planned that paints a disturbing image of what Godzilla was truly capable of. So let me describe to you the scene from Shin Godzilla that was so disturbing, it had to get cut. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are well aware of this theory, but we're gonna do a quick recap. The theory goes as follows: Shin Godzilla would continue to evolve and form into different variations before becoming the ultimate being. engulfing the universe and essentially becoming God. But what I'm about to tell you does not come from a concept, theory, or rumor. It was a film scene that was supposed to be included in Shin Godzilla, which was potentially deleted for being far too gory. It further dives into the concept of evolution and what this creature was willing to do to survive. Whether or not that's intentionally or a physical survival mechanism, shifting and contorting its body against its will. We see Godzilla evolve through several forms throughout the film, starting things off as a giant aquatic tadpole, followed by a newt-like monster that began to walk on land, and then the big boy that stomps through the streets of Tokyo, adapting all sorts of defense mechanisms like its deadly atomic breath, which shoots from multiple directions, including his mouth, spines, and tail. And the final evolution came in the form of smaller humanoid Godzillas, forming at the end of its tail, reaching for the sky and fighting for survival. This is a disturbing image and one that has horrifying implications for what the world would have looked like if the military had been unsuccessful with their plans. However, this isn't the scene that this video is based around. Instead, we have to go a little further back to the night before Godzilla's rampage. We cut to a survey team investigating the scene, suited out in protective gear to shield them from the surrounding radiation, with their flashlights illuminating the rubble of collapsed buildings. They slowly make their way through the wreckage before something drops down from above. The surveyors jump and look down at what made the noise, and the very sight disturbs them to the core. They see a putrid, gelatinous blob smacked up against the concrete, covered in blood and flesh, with sharp teeth growing out of the skin and bulbous red eyes staring back at them. This should be horrifying enough, but when the team looks up to see where it came from, they see more of the disgusting creatures growing along the side of the building, spreading like a fungus looking down at the surveyors with a frightening curiosity. This scene is truly horrifying and would have really pushed the film further into the horror genre. But what exactly is going on here? Well, after the military engaged with Godzilla, parts of his body fell onto the buildings below. Since Shin Godzilla is all about the monster evolving to combat mankind's weaponry, so what we see is that even Godzilla's flesh is alive and fighting for survival even when disconnected from the main host. This act is called mitosis, a process in which a cell replicates its chromosomes and then segregates them, producing two identical nuclei in preparation for cell division. The development of eyes and teeth implies that the pieces of tissue are evolving themselves and will eventually become another Godzilla. That's right, even those blobs have consciousness. If you take a look at the concept art, you will see what this flesh becomes, with it growing until it becomes an entirely new Godzilla head. With enough time, there would be multiple Godzillas flattening cities, growing and becoming even more powerful. So imagine Godzilla as being one cell, and that cell is to split off reproducing until it completely engulfs its host, which being our very own planet. The ultimate defense mechanism. Whenever it got hurt, it would only spread and become stronger. Now think about how many of these eldritch horrors are scattered throughout the city, dropped off after following military bombardments. It's like something from a Lovecraftian horror book. Humanity's demise would all but be inevitable. But why was it cut? Well, there are a few reasons. Toho probably realized that the sight of this thing would have been too much for general audiences, and would have potentially put off people from wanting to see something so disgusting. Although what's more likely is that Toho simply didn't believe this was something they didn't want to have associated with Godzilla, and that what Godzilla was being truly pushed to the brinks of unrecognizability. Reportedly, they stated it challenged what they thought Godzilla was. It also takes away from the twist at the end, with the next evolution of Godzilla splitting off and creating multiple smaller Godzillas, taking the form of the most dangerous creature on the planet, that being humankind. Godzilla's tissues being alive and evolving creates more problems, to say the very least. Since the film ends with Godzilla freezing, what happens to all these gelatinous blobs? It puts humanity in a scenario where we would have absolutely no chance of survival, based against nearly impossible odds. So pulling back on the mitosis elements helped round up the story, putting a bow at the ending that would have previously left a lot of questions unanswered. This wouldn't be the first time this disgusting imagery was explored, since Hideaki's Thanos 1995 film Neon Genesis Evangelion, that has one particular vomit-inducing sight, which is a eyeball forming out of a palm. Just kind of gross. And in all honesty, I've actually been binge watching this series. It's really good, so yeah. I would like to get a couple requests for maybe a few of those monsters/angels. And in retrospect, this scene looks very similar to what we almost saw in Shin Godzilla. And I personally can't help but think that Shin Godzilla was probably influenced by some of the angels in that series. Now, personally, I would have loved to have seen this type of horror implicated into the film. This genre of horror honestly really appeals to me, in a fascinating, disgusting, disturbing kind of way. This is the type of disgusting body horror that you can find in films such as The Thing and The Fly. And the terrifying implications have endless potential. Godzilla has been going for 70 years with 38 films. So experiments like this are certainly welcomed. But I know this scene has had some mixed opinions online, with the general consensus being, what am I looking at? Which I can understand. It's absolutely a shock to the staple of Godzilla, questioning everything we know about the king of the monsters. But what did you think of this horrifying scene? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video today, be sure to smash that like button as hard as a kaiju, as I like to say. And if you just so happen to be new here today, be sure to stomp on that subscribe button today, I do say, so you don't miss a video or a short update. And this concludes all the information we have today on Shin Godzilla, you could say, so it's time for the build rundown, I do say. So one could say there were only 3 materials used today on Shin Godzilla Part 2, I say. We used a small amount of oven-baked clay to make those tail spikes, you could say. And along that way, we did a lot of different paint methods today. First one being a layer of spray paint, then we basically went over the spikes entirely with a coat of red, and then we dry brushed every single one, hitting the high spots so that way we still had a bit of black in combination with that red. Now honestly, probably one of the more time-consuming spikes that I've made, other than, well, Shimo. The big difference there being Shimo basically was a lot of paint work, whereas Shin Godzilla was a combination of both here. Paintwork and sculpting. And I'm proud to say we got our first layer of clay on Shin Godzilla today. Which leads us into what will be happening in Part 3. A lot more sculpting, essentially. I'm hoping to have this movie monster project finished by then, so we'll be adding in all the details as well as muscles. So stay tuned, everyone, because not only will Shin Godzilla be finished in Part 3, but there'll be lots of updates along the way, I say. Plus, we'll be going over all 8 forms, you could say. Hello everyone, my name is Evan and I like to make stop-motion dinosaurs and monsters. And during this YouTube video today, I'm proud to say we'll be finishing off Shin Godzilla today, I do say. On this movie monster project today, we have a lot of crafting to do, I say. And as I sculpt and paint away at Shin Godzilla today, we'll be discussing the 8 forms of this kaiju, I do say. For the abrupt ending of Shin Godzilla with a creature that showed so much promise for total annihilation, the audience was left for an itch for more. The movie was made in an unofficial protest towards the slow reaction in regards to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, focused again on Godzilla emerging from the ocean to destroy Japan, and this time it was a completely different take on the kaiju. Shin Godzilla himself was evolution incarnate. He was supposedly an ancient sea life form that was exposed to radiation and radioactive waste dumped by the United States, and he kept on evolving until he became a 118.5 meter tall kaiju. So according to the art of Shin Godzilla as well as several other official publications, the 4th form was merely just the beginning. So, therefore, Godzilla would continue to evolve. Future forms and consequences of this have been noted. And it was pointed out that extinction on a subcellular scale was necessary to defeat Shin Godzilla, and that the blood coagulant was just a temporary measure, something that would be easily overcome by Godzilla, who is evolution himself. So in this video, we're going to discuss all the 8 forms of Shin Godzilla that he was theorized to have. And I'm sure by the end of this video, you're going to be shocked to know what he was going to become. So let's go step by step till we get to the final stage. So first off, the pre-form. Godzilla is not formed by the dropping of a nuclear bomb this time, but rather it's nuclear waste dumping that does the trick. Godzilla, just like other monsters, if not all, is a monster that humans made directly or indirectly. In part 1, we learned that it was created when a marine animal consumed nuclear waste, dumped by the United States in the sea in the 1940s or 50s. Once again, nuclear waste and victims lie at the origin of Godzilla. These marine animals were ancient sea life forms that still continue to exist to this present day, and this origin is very similar to Destroyers. Now the first form. The first form is never physically seen in the film aside from its tail, and part of its back. The tail is a reddish color while the back is covered in tan dorsal fins. And while the art behind Shin Godzilla shows that the first form was a tadpole-like creature that had 2 legs that were very primitive in looks. The head kind of resembles a frog with very large gills coming out the sides. It also seems to have the same yellowish skin from the second form that made landfall. While the dorsal plates are barely formed, they are quite visible though. The biggest sequence was the overactive tail part, and was easily over 14 to 20 meters long. And it should be briefly mentioned that it's unknown as to whether or not this form has any powers at all. Now, onto the second form. Godzilla's second form stands horizontally, with its body held parallel to the ground. This form had small stubs in place of arms, and huge eyes with small black pupils. Unlike Godzilla's later forms, this one possesses a sickly yellow pigmentation, with red exposed muscle on its back, and shark-like gills that frequently bleed, showing that this creature struggles to breathe outside of the water. It also has a tail that has a fluke at the end of it like the first form. This form looks like it crawled out of some hellish womb and was crawling without any purpose or direction. However, it was still really big at 28 meters tall or 91 feet. The third form. The third form of Shin Godzilla is very much like traditional incarnations. In regards to appearance, this form of Godzilla is bipedal, with stronger and more developed hind limbs, and has the ability to assume a much more modern-day like Godzilla stance. It also has short forelimbs and a long neck compared to its body. And in this form, heat can be seen visibly from its fins, meaning that its mutation consumes a lot of energy, and therefore produces a lot of heat. Its gills have also shrunk and closed up, suggesting that this form has now adapted to breathing on land. Despite being bipedal, its legs have not fully developed, causing it to noticeably shake while walking. The fourth form, which is the one we're making. This fourth form is very much akin to other Godzilla designs, being fully bipedal with a fully developed row of dorsal spines, and a much taller height compared to its prior form. The shade of skin for this form is much darker and black in color, with red glowing highlights around in the more exposed areas of the body, such as its neck, back, legs, and chest. His hellish face has no cheeks or lips, and multiple rows of jagged and gnarled teeth that seem to jut out in every direction. His eyes do not have any eyelids, although a protective nictitating membrane sometimes forms over them when spewing out the thermal flame, as well as the atomic breath. The most noticeable change, which was the tail, which was easily twice as long as the entire body. Now, I do realize mine isn't quite to that scale, but I don't have room or enough clay for that at the moment, but there will be more Shin Godzilla in the future, aka animation preparation coming soon. The fifth form seen in the movie. After being forcibly fed with blood coagulant, Shin Godzilla went into an inanimate stage, in which his entire body shuts down. But to fight humans, he must evolve to become like them. And hence Godzilla's fifth form takes on an eerily human-like shape, with Godzilla-like dorsal plates running up their spines. And models for the evolution showed that they lacked eyes, despite the original concept art actually possessing them. And a large divide runs down their cranium. Like its predecessor's form, the humanoid forms, they are slightly muscular but appear to be very emaciated, with a large hole present in their chest, which kind of makes them look like deadly zombie kaijus. Shameless plug there as well. Now, the proposed fifth form. The concept art of Shin Godzilla, as well as other publications, this movie monster was going to acquire the capability of flight, apparently. Perhaps with wings or shooting his atomic breath and propelling himself like a rocket. Who knows? I mean, that's been done before. He was also proposed to go with self-division without limits, to eventually cover the entire planet. And with his divided forms, he may shrink in size and form a legion. becoming immune to the blood coagulant plant, as well as lose sensitivity to pain and emotions, and would be capable of regenerating an entire new Godzilla from the smallest of fragments from his body if he was ever defeated or a part of him got blown off. So essentially, the evolutionary strategy was to become a swarm species of smaller Godzillas and take over the entire world. Interestingly, it was revealed in 2012 that a memo named Shin Godzilla was left by Ishiro Honda. He was planning on creating a Godzilla that would self-divide and coalesce enemies and grow larger. There is a deleted scene within the film that features a slightly different take on Godzilla's adaptation as well as mutation. And I'm just gonna sum things up briefly here because I covered this in part 2, so if you want a more in-depth version of this deleted scene, be sure to check that out if you haven't already, after you finish part 3, obviously. So essentially, they find a biomass that's been blown off the monster, and this biomass started developing eyes and teeth, which would eventually form probably an entire new Shin Godzilla. But the creators of the film thought this idea would be too disturbing. The sixth form. In this other form that never made it to the big screen, Godzilla was planned to overcome the requirements for air and water to survive. Since that we all know that Godzilla was born from radiation, he will evolve to an extent that he will achieve self-energy production, and will have more than likely in this state achieve limitless nuclear fusion, and thus overcome any energy problems. However, there is still the factor of consuming hydrogen for fusion. Other plans for him, along with having energy independence, he would transform into a Lovecraftian entity that would eventually lose all of his organs and become a fleshy mass with no indescribable parts. And during this stage, he will eventually invade outer space and onto other planets, spreading his form of life throughout the universe. Now, the seventh form. As he continues to expand and evolve to survive the conditions of outer space, he will become a hive mind and know everything that is happening around. He would be able to survive any type and all type of harsh environments, on all types of planets, and space objects. But the strangest feature of this evolution is that he will be able to synthesize any material and elements out of will to form out of nowhere. And also due to this, he will be able to generate and contain a small universe inside his own body. But even this will have an end. But as his evolution and purpose is to never cease to exist, he will overcome this with Stage 8. The eighth and final form. The eighth and final form of Shin Godzilla is planned and theorized to transist physical form, and essentially reaching a certain level of God. And with this, he will obtain immortality. Not the vampire kind of immortality, but the omnipotent and omniscient and godlike immortality, is that he is only present in his own universe, and everything that is in it is a part of him. He would become the Lovecraftian entity called Azdoth, a giant slumbering god, in which everything that exists is because of his dreams. In his final form, he will be the ultimate stage of life itself, and create and destroy new life as he so pleases. So that concludes the 8 forms of Shin Godzilla today. I hope you enjoyed this video, I do say. If you did, be sure to smash that like button as hard as a kaiju today, because this Godzilla took about a month to make, you could say. So your support is highly appreciated today. So subscribe if you're new today and share with your monster-loving friends, I say. Or the 8th form of Shin Godzilla might just, well, wish you away. And I'll briefly mention the next video is going to be an animation preparation, where I'm going to be restoring all my Godzillas in preparation for a Godzilla zombie dinosaur war. With that being said, be sure to make a suggestion in the comments below on what monster you would like to see next. I basically run a point system, and well, more comments for more monsters or dinosaurs means more likely that that project's going to be in the future. So once again, I want to thank you all for your support. It means the world to me because there's a lot of work and time and effort that goes into making these kaijus. Anyway, I will leave you to the rest of the glamour shots of Shin Godzilla. Enjoy! Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.